Right, over to you, Florence.
Oh, hello, everybody. Thanks again for all your comments this week. We know you're all busy preparing for half term if you're in a UK school, that is, but abroad is probably the same, similar breaks coming up very soon. So thank you for taking the time to join us again this week on our sessions. Don't forget that the MOOC will remain open for 2 more weeks after the end of next week, so you will have time to catch up or revisit steps if you need to. So from your comments, a few things we'd like to discuss with you. One of them is developing an understanding and an awareness of language. So quite a few of you, Caroline, Shelley, Rebecca, Helen and Elodie, mentioned that explicit knowledge about the native language can be an impediment to learning about the grammar of the foreign language. And that's a really interesting point. Certainly being able to talk about language in an abstract way can help raise awareness of the links between form and meaning in a foreign language. And we know that making links between form and meaning is an essential factor in language learning generally. There's a large body of language pedagogy research that suggests that when teaching grammar, explicit awareness of the connection between form and meaning is helpful. And with respect to younger learners, a colleague at the University of Reading, Dr. Rowena Kasprowicz, found that explicit awareness raising involving articles and how they change to reflect meaning, for example, case, or whether they are the subject or object of a sentence, that improved how they learned this grammar rule. There's actually a link to a summary of her study in this week's reading task. Knowing the names for parts of speech could also help us to focus children's attention on particular aspects of language. We know, for example, that an explicit focus on grammar points has been found by researchers to be useful for older learners, for example, at university level. So this development of awareness of language is quite important and can reinforce the links with emerging literacy as well. I'll hand over now to my colleague.
Thanks, Florence. I'm going to talk about WAGOL, what a good one looks like, which many of you really, really liked. Of course, we know from learning research that when learners have a clear idea of their destination, this can facilitate engagement and learner involvement. What we often talk about, which is learner autonomy. You often see that term in language learning research. You mentioned that Sarah's idea to use previous students' work as a model rather than the teacher produced one was especially important. This was recognised by Caroline, Catherine, Vannery, Nicola, A. Green, Elodie, Helen and Carol Ann. A. Green had a great idea that a WAGOL could be children's first port of call when they have a query about the task they're engaged in. And this could encourage problem solving and independence. We also liked Carol Ann's suggestion about creating a WAGOL folder. So thanks very much for sending us all your comments. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Gail. Thanks. Another theme that emerged from your comments was the one that talked about a safe place to learn. So you seem to be already aware that when designing activities for language use, you need to create a safe space for learning, as your children are self-conscious. Carol Ann, Catherine and Caroline mentioned that, afraid of making mistakes, Nicola, A. Green and Kie. And Sarah felt that children recording themselves is a good strategy, and this makes sense to us because learners get the chance to practice and record at their own pace, possibly in small groups, and they can then re-record or pause recordings until they're happy with their own work. Carol Ann models making mistakes to show children that making mistakes is normal when learning a new language. And as Catherine and Rebecca note, building confidence is key, and it's so important that the primary language learning experience is positive and productive. We explored last week how a sense of progression becomes increasingly important as children move across upper primary. If our aim is to instill a love of language learning, we need to encourage children to understand that errors are a natural part of the language learning process. Research shows us this, but also that it's important to take risks with language. We can create safety for learners by scaffolding our tasks. Sarah's frame and table in this week's story, which breaks down the sentence patterns, is a useful example of a scaffold. We can then gradually decrease the extent of the scaffolding and therefore increase the level of challenge as learners' confidence grows. And as teachers, you can make judgments about individual children and how ready they might be to extend their experimentation with language.
Thanks, Alison. That's really interesting. I'm going to take up the idea of links across the curriculum that several of you commented on. So, for example, Kia and Catherine noticed the importance of linking language with wider learning, and that then allows a focus on the language use rather than the content. Britta adds to that this focus gives a sense of purpose and importantly makes foreign language learning less abstract, which is really important. We'd agree with that and suggest that there's a really unique opportunity afforded by language learning in primary schools in particular. So, for example, you might be a class teacher who's also teaching languages. You might like to make simple links to the foreign language. For example, maybe describing a work of art, the colour, the shapes that are involved. Or you might be a visiting teacher and you could build on topics you know the children are already covering in class. So that might be, for example, listening to music in French or Spanish, key composers, and talking about how that makes the children feel. So, for example, happy, sad, excited, if those are words you've taught them. And then that illustrates really nicely Britta's point that children in those examples are using the foreign language to communicate about something which is important or useful or interesting to them. And we know from research that giving them that sense is a very important thing to foster motivation and learning in general. So next week we'll be exploring more how you can make links with L1 literacy in particular. And we'll be thinking about how and whether we can use children's knowledge about language and their developing L1 reading skills to support foreign language literacy. Don't forget to complete the week 2 questionnaire, please. Even if you've already done one in week 1, the questions are different this week and it will be really useful for us to keep getting your feedback. So everyone, take care, have a good break if you're on half term or another kind of holiday, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.